Every 100 years, a woman identical in appearance to her predecessors appears in the village of Caxican. This woman, referred to as the village ancestor, lives precisely until her 100th birthday before passing away. The village ancestor holds a unique status in our village, and portraits of these women, dressed in period-specific clothing, are displayed in the main ancestral hall. The most recent portrait from the last 100 years is a 17-inch black and white photo of a young, beautiful girl with the typical bangs of that era, thick eyebrows, big eyes, and a clear gaze. On the day the old ancestor passed away, a baby girl named Chinyen was born in the village, marking her as the new village ancestor. I am a year younger than Chinyen, and I grew up hearing stories about the village ancestor, naturally admiring her. Chinyen was different from other children. She was solitary, often sitting alone on the hilltop. While other children were afraid of her, I wasn't. I would follow her around, calling her sister, regardless of whether she responded. Being pretty, sweet, and clingy, I gradually grew close to Chinyen. I discovered that beneath her cold exterior, she was gentle, caring for the plants and animals in the forest and looking out for me. I saw Chinyen as my sister and never thought the title of village ancestor had any special meaning. Unlike others, I didn't keep my distance from her because of it. Our village was poor, with only one primary school, and the nearest middle school was several kilometers away in the town, requiring children to board there. Chinyen was gentle, beautiful, and intelligent. I naturally assumed she would continue her studies through middle school like the rest of us. However, she dropped out after primary school. Hearing this, I asked her why she had stopped studying. She sat under the big jujube tree at the village entrance, her head bowed, with her hair covering half her face, making her seem gloomy. She coldly replied, "The town is too far, I can't go." "It's not that far, it's just 2 mountains," I retorted, dissatisfied with her answer. Suddenly, Chinyen raised her eyes and stared at me deeply, her gaze so calm and unfathomable, like a lake with an unknown depth, instilling a sense of fear in me. Her stare left me speechless, with goosebumps running up my spine. After that, I found Chinyen terrifying and had nightmares for a long time, where monsters took on her appearance and chased me. Each time I woke up from these nightmares, the memory of her gaze that day would make me shiver under the covers. From then on, like the other villagers, I kept my distance from Chinyen. She seemed indifferent to this, continuing her life as usual, unaffected by anyone's presence or absence. My father was the most successful man in our village, having made a fortune selling fruits in the city. Thanks to him, I became the only person in our village to attend high school in the big city. My father threw a grand celebration, and to everyone's surprise, Chinyen showed up. She usually never attended such gatherings, and her presence at any celebration was unheard of. My father felt honored and insisted I treat her warmly. I hadn't seen Chinyen for a while, and she had grown to look more and more like the portraits in the ancestral hall. Seeing her suddenly gave me a strange sense of unease. Our relationship had become distant. I reluctantly invited her to sit, and she did so with such grace that I noticed her demeanor was unlike that of a typical village woman. She exuded an air of elegance, like an aristocratic lady from ancient times, and this thought sent a chill through me. I sat nervously with Chinyen, wishing my father would come to rescue me from this awkward situation. My father, however, was being pestered by villagers to drink and had passed out after only 2 tables. Unable to wait for him, I sat with Chinyen until she finally said she wanted to leave. Relieved, I was about to see her out when she suddenly bent down, her waterfall-like hair cascading down, momentarily blinding me. All I could see was her pale, bloodless face and her deep, gloomy eyes. Terrified, I almost jumped out of my seat, but she held me down with one hand, pinning me to the chair. Her mouth curved into a faint smile as she softly said, "Xiaomei, remember to come back." My spine went rigid, and I was too scared to move for a long time. That night, I sleepwalked. In my dream, Chinyen was chasing me, saying she wanted to take me back to the village. I ran for my life. My father said that in the middle of the night, while everyone was asleep, I suddenly burst out the door and dashed outside. He thought a thief had broken in and, seeing my shadow running away, chased after me. My father's sleepiness vanished as he instinctively realized something was wrong. He quickly ran after me. In the pitch-black night, I ran faster than a rabbit. My father shouted after me, chasing me up the hill, where he helplessly watched me jump off the cliff. Seeing me jump, his legs went weak, and he fell to his knees. "Do you know how I crawled to the bottom of the hill, crying?" he asked, wiping his tears. Luckily, Anchin had just cleared some grass and piled it at the bottom. Otherwise, I'd have been collecting your body. I interrupted my father, urgently asking, "Did you see anyone else on your way to get my body?" He replied, "Not a soul, not even a ghost." Where would people come from? But I clearly remembered seeing Chen Yan. She fed me something when I was barely alive. A chilling fear crept through my bones. I couldn't be sure if I had really seen her since I was on the brink of death and likely not clear-headed. Maybe it was just a dream, but there were many things I couldn't understand. Why did I sleepwalk? I'd never had that problem before. Sleepwalking aside, why would I jump off a cliff? There was no evidence linking Chen Yan to the incident, but her presence was everywhere. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have been scared into sleepwalking. The cliff I jumped from was where she loved to sit and daydream. After I jumped, she seemed to have appeared there. The more I thought about it, the more terrified I became, breaking out in a cold sweat. I developed a fear of both the village and Chen Yan. After being discharged from the hospital, I went straight to the city with my father. For the next 7 years, I never returned to the village. I finished high school in the city, got into college, and started dating a local boy. He had never been to the countryside. Sometimes, we would talk about our childhoods, and I would tell him many stories about my village. The joys of childhood are always unforgettable, even if my departure wasn't pleasant. Years later, I still recalled the happy times. My boyfriend was intrigued by village life, and I had a sudden idea: why not take him back during the summer to experience authentic rural life? When I mentioned the idea to my boyfriend, he readily agreed. After 7 years, as I set out for the village again, my excitement slowly turned into apprehension. My boyfriend noticed my sudden mood change and asked what was wrong. I thought for a moment and decided to give him a heads up. I haven't mentioned this before, but there's something strange about our village. My boyfriend became interested immediately. "Tell me more," he urged. I briefly mentioned the village ancestor, and his curiosity grew. He asked many questions, and I told him everything I knew. Oddly enough, while other villages had seen some development over the years, even if not prosperous, ours had remained unchanged, as if forgotten by the booming economy. My father drove us to the town in his second-hand truck, where we left the vehicle with a friend and hiked several kilometers, carrying our bags. Walking on the familiar muddy road, any tension or anxiety I had felt earlier melted away, replaced by a long-lost sense of joy. My grandparents were waiting under the big jujube tree at the village entrance. Seeing their stooped, white-haired figures brought tears to my eyes. Strangers rarely visited our village, so the villagers gathered at my grandparents' house out of curiosity. My boyfriend and I distributed the snacks and candies we had brought. Many of my childhood friends now had children, who lined up to call me Auntie. After mingling with the villagers, my boyfriend urged me to take him to the main ancestral hall to see the legendary village ancestor portraits. I tried to dissuade him, explaining that the hall was usually locked and only opened during rituals by the village leader. My boyfriend wouldn't give up. "Let's just look at the door," he suggested. I realized then where horror movie characters who love to take risks come from. Art imitates life. On the way to the ancestral hall, we ran into Chen Yan. I had seen the village ancestor portraits and knew she was beautiful, but I had underestimated the impact of her beauty in real life. After years apart, Chinyen had grown into the exact likeness of the village ancestor: dark brows, black hair, almond-shaped eyes, and red lips. I had always considered myself attractive, but next to her, I felt utterly inadequate. My boyfriend stared at her, unable to look away. Chinyen wore that familiar faint smile, the one that had haunted my childhood nightmares. Instinctively, I wanted to hide behind my boyfriend, but seeing his captivated expression made me angry enough to forget my fear. Chinyen greeted me first. "You're back." I responded awkwardly. Her gaze shifted to my boyfriend, and I couldn't help but feel she looked at him a little too long. My boyfriend casually greeted her, and his behavior annoyed me. Even after she left, he kept staring after her. "Is she the village ancestor?" he asked. "What's her name again?" "Chinyen." "Nice name." When he finally turned back to me, seeing me glaring at him with my hands on my hips, he laughed and put his arm around my shoulder. "Let's go, let's see the portraits." I had assumed my boyfriend, having no experience with village life, would struggle for the first couple of days. To my surprise, he adapted better than I did, eating and sleeping well. In the height of summer, the plum trees were bearing fruit. I gave him a straw hat and planned to let him experience a day as a fruit farmer. The wild plum trees were tall, and as I happily used a stick to pick the fruit, a pale, bloodless face suddenly appeared among the swaying leaves, nearly causing me to fall from the tree. Unnoticed, Chinyen had appeared under the tree, her dark eyes devoid of warmth. Her gaze shifted from me to my boyfriend as she directly asked him, "Do you want to see the hilltop?" Xiaomei used to love playing there with me. My boyfriend eagerly jumped down from the tree. "Sure." With Chinyen leading the way and my boyfriend following, I trailed behind, angrily kicking stones along the path. I recalled the first time I met my boyfriend. I was wearing a new dress and walked past him. When he glanced at me, his previously calm eyes rippled with interest. He had fallen for me at first sight. People say love at first sight is unreliable. A man who falls for you at first sight can just as easily fall for someone else. Why couldn't that someone else be Chinyen? I followed them to the hilltop, which indeed had a beautiful view. From Chinyen's usual spot, the entire village was visible. At that moment, my boyfriend stood there, stretching and looking out happily. I had kicked stones all the way to the top and was angrily stomping one into the dirt when I heard my boyfriend say, "From this angle, the landscape below forms the character, urn." He said it nonchalantly, but Chinyen suddenly looked up. I wasn't in the mood to care about urns, but her reaction puzzled me, so I let the stone go and walked to the edge. Due to my fear from past experiences, I didn't dare get too close to the edge and look down from a distance. I couldn't see the character anywhere and scolded my boyfriend, "Nonsense." He chuckled and picked up a stick to draw the ancient character, urn, on the ground. It wasn't the simplified form but the traditional one. Both characters meant the same thing. I looked again, comparing the character he drew, and realized he was right. Our village, viewed from above, indeed formed the shape of an urn. "You're a science student, why learn so many obscure characters?" I asked. My boyfriend shamelessly replied, "You need to know a bit of everything. You never know when it might come in handy." "Isn't that right?" He directed the question at Chinyen. Chinyen seemed a bit startled and subconsciously nodded. Within 2 days, rumors spread throughout the village, even reaching my father. He sat at home with a pot of tea, waiting for me. When I emerged from my room after a nap, my father, visibly upset, asked, "Where's your boyfriend?" Groggy and confused, I didn't understand the situation. My father took a swig of tea and scolded me, "Sleep, sleep, all you do is sleep. Your man has run off with someone else, and you're still sleeping." If my father hadn't berated me, I wouldn't have known that every afternoon while I napped, my boyfriend and Chinyen were together. Villagers had seen them multiple times, and they didn't even try to hide it, seemingly wanting everyone to know. I felt humiliated. My father, unable to stand my distress, threatened to beat him. I stopped him, saying, "Don't worry about this. I'll handle my boyfriend myself." Before my boyfriend returned from Chinyen, I started packing my bags. It didn't take long since I didn't have much. As I finished, he walked in. I handed him my bags and said, "Let's go back to the city today." He sat down with the bags and calmly said, "I'm not leaving." I was furious. "What do you mean? Have you really fallen for her?" My tall boyfriend sat on the small stool, looking quite docile. He rested his elbow on his knee, holding his chin with one hand, and smiled at me. His demeanor annoyed me even more. "Get a grip. She might be pretty, but that doesn't mean you're a match." He nodded quickly, agreeing, "Yes, yes." "Then what do you mean? You're not seriously thinking of staying, are you?" He put the bags down, looked at me, and said seriously, "Yes." I was incredulous, raising my voice. "Did she put a spell on you?" My boyfriend scratched his head. "No, nothing like that. Don't overthink it." Though we hadn't been together long, I knew him well enough. He might seem unserious, but he was upright and principled, never messing around. This situation was completely off. I had brought him to the village, so I couldn't ignore the strange things happening to him. Summoning courage from who knows where, I decided to confront Chinyen alone. I went to her house first. Her mother said she had gone up the hill. Huffing and puffing, I climbed up and found Chinyen sitting at her usual spot, gazing at the scenery. I stood 2 meters behind her. Sensing my presence, she turned to look at me with calm, water-like eyes. I felt nervous, leaning against a large rock for support, and stammered, "You and my boyfriend, you too." Mentioning my boyfriend, I saw a visible change in Chinyen's eyes, a strange light of excitement deep within her dark pupils. I was almost certain she had intentions toward him. My question stuck in my throat, and I felt all my strength leave me. I almost begged, "Chinyen, please let him go." She tilted her head, stood up, and with a strange smile, began walking toward me. "Remember 7 years ago, Xiaomei?" she said as she walked. "That night you sleepwalked and jumped from here." Her advancing steps mirrored the scenes from my nightmares. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and I instinctively wanted to run, but the rock behind me dug into my back, and my legs felt like jelly. "Don't come any closer," I tried to shout. Blindly, I tried to stop her, but Chinyen calmly confessed, "I did that. I bewitched you to sleepwalk and jump off the cliff." My heart pounded with shock, feeling like it would leap out of my throat. So, it was her. Chinyen stepped slowly to stand before me, her lips forming the words, "I'm sorry." Paralyzed by fear, I was stunned for a moment. She continued in a detached tone, "I had to do it." I was completely dumbfounded. "What do you mean?" Chinyen didn't answer. She took my hand and led me to the edge. Terrified she might push me, I struggled with all my might, screaming, "Let go of me." Chinyen made a shushing gesture, saying, "Look." As if bewitched, I stopped. The mountain breeze blew, lifting a strand of her black hair. She let go of my hand and gazed into the distance, as she had done countless times before. Only then did I see the desolation in her eyes. "Do you see it?" she asked, pointing to the village below. "Do you see it? That's an urn." I didn't understand. Her familiar faint smile appeared. Hundreds of years ago, this was a general's territory. The feng shui here is unique. The general commissioned a large urn formation, and the people from the manor were forced to move here, becoming the first villagers. "What's an urn formation?" I asked. Chinyen's tone was icy. "It's a formation that steals fortune. Everyone born here has their fortune taken to nourish the formation's master and his descendants. It sounded like a fairy tale, impossible to believe. Chinyen continued, the villagers have their fortunes taken, leaving them poor and destitute. Few ever leave. Even if you leave, it doesn't mean you escape because your roots are here. My mind reeled, on the verge of collapsing. I stared at Chinyen, unable to react. She lowered her eyes and asked softly, do you know why a woman identical to the last is born every 100 years? I shook my head in shock. Chinyen's lips showed a trace of bitterness. The so-called village ancestor is the formation's eye. It's always been the same soul. I've been trapped here for generations, unable to reincarnate or leave the formation. I can't even go to the town beyond the 2 mountains. Finally, I understood why she had dropped out of school. She had been trapped in the village for centuries. Shocked, I felt a deep sympathy for her. Chinyen's expression was bleak, as if lamenting her fate. She spoke softly, you have great fortune. Even in this formation, you had the chance to leave. I was so happy when I learned you could leave. There was a hint of warmth in her eyes. Years ago, when I was a child playing by her side, she had looked at me with those same gentle eyes. But as time passed and too many things happened, she became more and more terrifying to me, and I hadn't seen that look since. My eyes welled up with tears. Chinyen seemed to recall the past, her voice lowering, I planted a mark on you. Since ancient times, dark arts have been condemned. The urn formation has remained hidden and undiscovered. I hoped the mark on you would signal someone outside, leading a skilled person to help. But my abilities were limited. I could only plant the mark on someone near death, so I had no choice but to make you jump, nearly killing you. The fragmented memories in my mind began to connect, clearing up past doubts. Secretly, she had harmed me. I should hate her, but I couldn't bring myself to do so. I sat in confused silence for a while until a thought struck me. The skilled person you mentioned, could it be my boyfriend? The world seemed so surreal. I hurried back home to find my boyfriend lounging in my grandpa's rocking chair. Seeing me, he cheerfully asked, "Did you sort things out?" I barely caught my breath. Is everything she said true? He smiled and nodded, of course. I stood dumbfounded once more, then angrily said, "So when you first saw me, it wasn't love at first sight. It was because you saw the mark on me?" He doubled over in laughter, and I started punching him. After letting me punch him a couple of times, he stopped laughing and said, "Don't be mad. Your destined partner isn't me. Besides, think about it. We act more like friends than a couple." I was still upset about being kept in the dark. "So who are you, really?" He stood up from the chair, smiling brightly, and solemnly said, "I am Jianyu, a disciple of Qi Mountain known as Jianyuan. But you can just call me your boyfriend." I scoffed, "Keep dreaming." Chinyen and Jianyu continued wandering around the village daily, and sometimes I joined them. Our harmonious trio became quite a spectacle in the village. My father now shook his head whenever he saw me, asking thrice a day if we should return to the city. I put all my effort into dealing with my father. A few days passed, and one afternoon, as I was about to nap, Jianyu and Chinyen walked in one after the other. My heart sank, I had a vague sense of what was coming. Chinyen looked at me quietly, a faint smile on her lips. "We've known each other for so long. Won't you come to see me off?" Holding back tears, I slowly climbed the hill. The two ahead didn't consider my feelings, climbing quickly. In less than 10 minutes, we reached the top. Chinyen stood at the edge, taking one last look at the familiar scenery, her smile as gentle as a spring breeze. My eyes were already red from crying. Chinyen turned to me, her gaze soft. I couldn't hold back any longer and rushed to hug her tightly, sobbing, "Chinyen, I forgive you. I'm not mad at you anymore. Chinyan gently patted my head, whispering in my ear, "Thank you, Xiaomei." Tears streamed down my face as she wiped them away. "You should be happy for me. I've waited 500 years for this day. I'm finally free. If there's a next life, I hope we meet again." Sobbing, I nodded, "We'll still be sisters. I'll take you to eat delicious food, travel, and visit many places. We won't stay in the mountains anymore." Chinyan's eyes were full of longing as she replied, "Okay." She then bowed deeply to Jiangyu in a manner only seen in ancient times. "Xinyuan Taoist, please assist me." Jiangyu nodded, and Chinyan smiled, spreading her arms like a bird about to take flight. Jiangyu pulled me behind him. A talisman appeared in his hand, and he began chanting. I felt a sudden breeze through the forest. His voice thundered, "Great Law Bell, urgent suppression, disperse." The talisman shot out like a sword, producing a dull crack as something shattered. My mind buzzed as if electrified, and I felt something silently and continuously flowing into me. The sensation was fleeting yet profound. When I regained my senses, Chinyan's body had turned translucent, gradually disappearing before my eyes, her face showing a peaceful, liberated smile. The formations I was broken, and the spell destroyed. I accompanied Jiangyu as we roamed the village, moving boulders, digging up roots, redirecting springs, and altering feng shui, tasks Chinyan and he had painstakingly uncovered. They intended to thoroughly dismantle the formation, leaving no chance for its resurgence. The first day, I mourned Chinyan's departure. The second day, I was moved by their efforts. The third day, I diligently worked alongside Jiangyu, hoping for Chinyan's happiness in her next life. On the fourth, fifth, and sixth days, I noticed that the villagers who had been wondering about the village ancestor suddenly stopped. The portraits in the ancestral hall became blurred, and I could barely recall details about Chinyan. I asked Jiangyu, "Will we all forget her?" He nodded, "Forgetting is good." Panicking, I ran to my room and wrote in my notebook, "Remember to take Chinyan on a trip. No mountain villages." Back in the city, my life became hectic. My graduate exam results came in, and I got into my desired school. A project I entered in a competition won first prize, and I was scheduled for a TV interview and a school lecture. That year, the government supported rural economic development, appointing my father to liaise with fruit wholesalers. He led the villagers in planting orchards, transforming our once poor village into a prosperous community. Everyone's lives improved, and each household had new hopes. Jiangyu and I broke up but remained good friends. Every time I saw him, I felt like I had forgotten something. Whenever I doubted, he'd smile and say, "Don't worry. If you forget, I'll remind you." Satisfied with his reassurance, I stopped worrying. Despite his playful demeanor, Jiangyu was quite reliable. The end. In Bego village, there is an unwritten custom: any woman who wants to marry into the village must be inspected by the men of the village on the night before the wedding. My elder sister died on the night she married into the village. Her body was brought back in the evening, and I stumbled and wanted to rush out to see her, but my mother stopped me. My mother, with red eyes, scolded me, "What are you, a little girl, doing?" I burst into tears. That's my elder sister, the one who loves me the most. Mother was stunned for a moment by my shout. Taking advantage of this, I pushed her away, ran to the yard, and lifted the white cloth covering my sister. I saw her tragic state. She was still wearing the red wedding dress, but it was now torn into pieces, and her body was covered with bruises, looking as if she had been beaten, but the marks were excessively dense all over her body. I stood still until I saw my mother holding my sister and crying. After that day, I fell ill, possibly from shock, and slept in a daze until I was awakened in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat that made me shiver in the night breeze. I got up in a daze, wanting to boil some water in the kitchen to wipe my face, but when I passed by my parents' room, I saw the light still on through the crack in the door, and faint sounds coming out. I seemed to hear my sister's name and couldn't help but stop and press my ear to the crack in the door. I heard my father's tired voice coming through the crack. Someone from Bago village came, saying that Xiaoseng is dead. The bride is gone, and they want us to return the bride price. I heard my mother shout angrily, "We haven't even settled accounts with those devils, and they have the nerve to come and ask for the bride price? I say we return the bride price and then take it to the police. Let's see what those devils..." My mother's angry words were interrupted by a loud bang. My father slapped the table and cursed, "Return the bride price? We've spent all that money on Ah Yao's wedding. How can we return it?" 2 months ago, my brother Guang Yao, who was studying at a technical college in the city, suddenly came home, bringing his pregnant girlfriend. My parents were both shocked and overjoyed and immediately talked about getting them married. But my brother's girlfriend demanded a bride price of 200,000 yuan, an astronomical figure for our family. My mother tactfully asked if it could be less, but the girlfriend cried and threatened to abort the confirmed male fetus. My father smoked a whole night, and the next day he told us he planned to marry my sister off to Bago village at the foot of the mountain. Bago village is an anomaly in the Wangyuan mountain area. The villagers seldom interact with the outside world, and girls in the village never marry out. Occasionally, they marry women from other villages, but for some reason, very few outsiders are willing to send their daughters there. However, whenever they do marry women from other villages, they offer an extremely generous bride price. For instance, when my sister married into the village, they gave a bride price of 600,000 yuan. The room was silent for a moment before I heard my mother's weak voice, "What should we do now?" Father also fell silent for a moment before saying heavily, "At this point, we can only send Xiaomei over." Xiaomei they mentioned was me. The room fell into dead silence again before I heard my mother scream, "No, no way. Xiaoseng is already dead. How can you send Xiaomei too?" Before my mother could finish her words, she was interrupted again, this time by a loud slap. I heard my father roar from inside the room, "I've decided. Don't you dare talk back to me. My daughters will marry whoever I say. You better pray that your younger daughter is more resilient than your elder daughter, or I'll send you over there instead." Early the next morning, my father knocked on my room door. His face, usually cold towards me, surprisingly had a rare hint of a smile. "Dad has thought it over. You're 18 now, and since your sister had an accident, why don't you marry into Bago village in her place?" I looked up at my father, neither agreeing nor refusing, just staring at him until his face grew uncomfortable. Then I suddenly asked, "Dad, was my sister killed by the people of Bago village?" A look of embarrassment flashed across my father's face, but he quickly scolded, "Killed or not, don't you, a little girl, talk nonsense. Anyway, the Liu family will come to pick you up in 3 days. Be ready." With that, he slammed the door and left. The news that I was to marry into Bago village spread throughout the village the next day. My father confined me to the house, not letting me go out. But even at home, I could hear the gossip outside the house. The night before the people from Bago village came to pick me up, I was sleeping fitfully and didn't know how long I had slept when I suddenly felt a chill spreading from my lower abdomen. I woke up with a start to find someone pressing on me, tugging at my clothes. By the moonlight, I recognized Zhang Yuan, a thug from the village. He had been eyeing me since last year, but after my mother caught him and beat him with a broom, he had behaved himself. But now, he had broken into my room in the middle of the night. I fought back like a madwoman, but Zhang Yuan, who used to be somewhat cautious, now only sneered disdainfully, "Come on, Jiang Mei. Stop pretending. Everyone knows you're going to marry into Bago village. What's wrong with letting us village folks have a taste first?" I froze at his words and asked, "What did you say?" Zhang Yuan muttered, "You don't know? The reason Bago Village gives so much money every time they marry an outsider is because they're all devils. They don't treat outsiders as humans. Any girl who marries into their village has to be enjoyed by all the men in the village, absorbing the essence of every man there to become part of their village. Do you think your sister died for any other reason? That's the truth. Lying on the bed, I felt a chill run through my limbs. The people from Bago Village arrived early the next morning. Leading the group were several young men who remained silent throughout, only staring when they saw me come out in my wedding dress. The wedding customs of Bago Village are extremely traditional. The bride must sit in the bridal sedan chair before dawn and reach the village entrance at an auspicious hour in the evening. My brother Guanyo escorted me, grumbling impatiently all the way, all this trouble just for that 200,000 yuan bride price. Once wasn't enough, now we have to do it a second time. It's so unlucky. I pretended not to hear his complaints as I sat in the sedan chair. When we reached the entrance of our village, the sedan chair suddenly stopped. I heard my brother shout impatiently, "Why is it blocked at the village entrance early in the morning? Don't you know we're sending off a bride from the Jiang family today?" There was a moment of silence outside the sedan chair before someone exclaimed in panic, "Zhang Yuan is dead in the rice field." I heard my brother gasp and then run off to see the commotion. He came back shortly, vomiting beside the sedan chair. "Zhang Yuan is really dead. His whole body was gnawed to pieces by rats. I feel like throwing up my New Year's dinner." My brother finally stopped vomiting and suddenly thought of something, lifting the curtain of my sedan chair. "I remember this Zhang Yuan was after you before, wasn't he?" Unlike my brother's fussing, my expression remained unchanged from start to finish. I didn't answer his question and just said calmly, "Let's get going. Don't miss the auspicious hour." By 5 p.m., we finally reached the entrance of Bago Village. My brother left, but the people from Bago Village didn't let me enter the village. They placed me in a wooden house at the village entrance. I sat inside, listening to the men who had escorted me chatting and smoking in the courtyard. "Hey, did you see? The girl the Jiang family sent this time is even younger than the last one. Isn't she? Last time I didn't get a chance before she died. It pissed me off for several nights. Come on, we're definitely in the latter half of the night in the hierarchy. Pray she isn't as useless as her short-lived sister and survives through the uncles and elders first." When those men talked about these things, they didn't try to lower their voices to avoid me. With a creak, the window behind the building suddenly opened. I saw a clumsy figure climbing in from the window carefully. "Mom!" The person who suddenly climbed in from the window was actually my mom. Before I could say anything, Mom came over and covered my mouth in panic. "Hush, Xiaomei. Keep your voice down. Don't let those people in the yard hear." Mom lowered her voice, looked outside the yard, and said nervously, "Hurry up and give me your wedding dress, and leave quickly." As she said that, Mom actually wanted to take off my clothes. I held her down and frowned. "Mom, what do you want to do?" "Of course I want to save you. This Bago village is a wolf's den. Your sister is already dead, I can't watch you die. Hurry up and let Mom dress up in your wedding dress to hold them back first." I shook my head gently. "Just like you said, this Bago village is a wolf's den. If they find out that you are pretending to be me, they will not let you go. I don't think they will give up just because." The bride has been replaced by a middle-aged woman. Mom's face turned pale, but she quickly tried to force a smile. "Mom, you are already this age, and you will still have to fall in love and get married in the future. You can't let it be ruined like this." But this time I pushed her away directly. I said softly, "Mom, thank you, but I must stay here today." Mom was stunned, and then she cried anxiously. "You stinky girl, do you know what you are talking about? That group of them." "I know." I interrupted my mother. Just because I know, I want to stay and avenge my sister. Mom looked at me blankly, and it seemed that she hadn't had time to react to the meaning of my words. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the door. "Third sister-in-law, you are here." I looked up and saw that someone seemed to be coming to the yard. I hurried to push Mom. "Mom, hurry up." And Mom seemed to realize that it was too late to change clothes with me at this time. She could only reluctantly and clumsily flip out of the window again. Almost at the same time, the door of the room opened. A middle-aged woman with a pretty face but a bloated figure walked in. She immediately raised her eyebrows when she saw me, and she muttered in dissatisfaction, "You are the youngest daughter of the Jiang family? How come this little body is thinner than your sister?" The woman began to explain impatiently. "Okay, introduce yourself. I am your future mother-in-law Zhang Guifang, and the one you are going to marry is my son Lu Feng. Let me briefly introduce the rules of our village to you. People with other surnames are not allowed to enter Bego village unless you are a daughter-in-law from another village who married in like you. But before entering the village to officially hold the wedding, you must first go through Gue Run. The so-called Gue Run means that you stay in this room at the entrance of the village for one night, waiting for a man of the right age in the village to moisturize you. When you have absorbed enough of the yang yuan of the men in our village, you will be considered a member of our village. Only then can you enter the village for the wedding." Zhang Guifang finished speaking in one breath, and there was a dead silence in the room. I looked up and looked directly at the room in front of me. This was a simple bedroom. According to Zhang Guifang, all brides from other villages return here. I was distracted for a moment. Zhang Guifang urged me impatiently, "Did you hear me?" I looked up at her, did not answer her, but asked, "Do you regret it?" Zhang Guifang was stunned and did not react. What did she regret? She regretted marrying to Bego village. Zhang Guifang's face froze. But soon she said impatiently, "What is there to regret? It's just a return, just one night, you can get through it." I laughed when I heard this, looked up at her, and asked directly, "Is it really just one night?" I saw Zhang Guifang's face turn pale. She didn't say anything, but I knew the answer was no. Because I know the nature of people. Maybe my eyes were too straightforward. Zhang Guifang said anxiously, "Okay, you wait here obediently." She slammed the door. The sky outside gradually darkened. I sat there and waited silently. I don't know how long it took, but the door finally opened. The first returnee finally came. I looked up and saw an old man with gray hair, who looked to be in his 50s. According to the rules of Bego village, the higher the seniority, the higher the position. When he saw me, his cloudy eyes suddenly lit up. He couldn't wait to come over and grab my hand. He looked at me and said, "The youngest daughter of the Jiang family, right? She is so pretty." I didn't hide or dodge, but just looked at him and said quietly, "Have you seen my sister?" The village chief froze and said with a smile, "Of course. I am the one who brings back all the brides from other families in Bego village." As he said this, he smacked his lips regretfully and said, "Speaking of your sister, what a beautiful girl. I was thinking that after she marries into the village, I can come from time to time." Village Chief Lu was halfway through his words when he suddenly realized that he had spoken out of turn, and quickly shut up and smiled. As he finished speaking and his aged body moved to touch me, he suddenly froze. His eyes widened in disbelief, his face turned ashen, and he slowly fell to the ground. He fell heavily, revealing a green snake coiled around his foot. At the same time, I squatted down. The village chief still had a breath left, staring at me in disbelief, his body trembling uncontrollably. I looked him in the eye and calmly asked, "How did my sister die?" The village chief's tongue had become paralyzed from the snake venom, and he struggled to utter unclear words, "I don't know." I slowly closed my eyes, and the snake bit his ankle again. The village chief shuddered and then stopped moving entirely. Meanwhile, the snake slithered up to my finger. Facing the snake, I did not flinch but gently held it, and it affectionately rubbed against my finger. I had kept my ability to communicate with animals a secret for a long time. Since I could remember, I could hear and talk to all the animals around me. I once thought this was a common ability, just like humans talking to each other. Until one day when I was 5 years old, the neighbor's kid bullied me, and I asked a snake to bite him. The kid's grandmother saw it and screamed that the Jiang family's second daughter was a witch. Only then did I realize that this ability was unique. So, I learned to hide myself. I no longer talked to animals in front of others, nor did I reveal my ability to command them. But only I knew that this ability grew stronger as I aged. Any animal, from insects to wild beasts, aquatic or terrestrial, whether ferocious or docile, would obey my command. I began to secretly use my ability to solve my problems. For instance, the night before my wedding, when Zhang Yuan tried to assault me, I had rats kill him. I regretted not knowing what my sister faced when she was to marry in Tobago village. I was naive and thought she was just getting married, so I didn't use my ability to protect her. Now, I could only use my ability to avenge her. After the village chief, several more old men came. I used the same trick, having the snake bite and paralyze them before asking about my sister's death. They had all participated in Gue Run with her, but none knew how she died. After each man was bitten to death, I threw the body out of the window and rang the bell at the door. This was their Gue Run rule. When one person finished, they would ring the bell at the door, which was connected to another bell in the village. As I rang the bell here, the bell in the village would also ring, summoning the next man. Gue Run lasts only one night and ends at dawn, so the men from Bago village came in a hurry. They didn't notice that the previous Gue Run participants had disappeared. Soon, the sixth participant arrived, finally not an old man but a fat man around 40 years old. As soon as he entered, he was breathing heavily, and a snake silently coiled around his ankle, which he didn't notice. He eagerly took out a pill to force into my mouth. The fat man suddenly froze as the snake bit him, and he fell stiffly, the pill rolling out of his hand. I grabbed his collar, a murderous gleam in my eyes. "What pill did you give me? Did my sister die from this pill?" The fat man's limbs were already stiff, his tongue beginning to numb, his plump face full of terror, his eyes constantly moving. He struggled to speak, and no. "I did give it to your sister, but I was helping her." A strong hatred flashed in my eyes, and I stomped on the fat man, turning to the ants on the ground and coldly said, "This piece of meat is yours today." I threw him into the wardrobe in the room. In the dim light, countless black lines gathered on the ground, and broken, stiff sounds came from his throat. I didn't know how long it took, but the fat man's voice finally stopped. I then walked to the door and rang the bell. I heard laughter and banter in the courtyard. This time, it wasn't just one person coming, but two young men, their loud voices carrying through the night. "Oh, that fat guy, always taking the longest time, just like before. You know, the uncles go first, and they're old, so they're quick. Besides, you know how the fat guy is." Just as their voices approached the door, the snake was ready to strike. Suddenly, another voice came from the courtyard, "Big brother, second brother." This voice sounded somewhat clean. The two men stopped, sounding surprised. "Xiao Wu, why are you here?" The one called Xiao Wu hesitated before answering. I thought it over and decided to join Gue Run. "So, today, can I go first?" There was a moment of silence outside before I heard the two men burst into laughter. "Xiao Wu, you've finally figured it out. You didn't want to before, but now you've come around. All right. Since you want to, as your big brother, I'll give you this chance. Second brother, let Xiao Wu go first." With that, the big brother and second brother laughed and left, discussing lewdly how long Xiao Wu would take. Shortly after, the door creaked open, and a clean-looking young man walked in. The snake was ready to strike, but I raised my hand to stop it. The young man didn't notice the snake in the dark and quickly came to me, saying, "While no one's around, you should leave quickly." I looked up at the young man, frowning slightly. "Why are you letting me go?" The young man stammered, "I just can't stand it. They're too much." When he mentioned my sister, I looked up sharply. The young man couldn't meet my eyes, filled with guilt. Honestly, I wanted to stop them before, but I never had the courage. Until I saw your sister's body, I realized I couldn't stand by and let innocent girls get hurt anymore. He suddenly looked at me, "So, I must let you go." I looked at the young man but didn't move. After a moment, I asked, "Do you know how my sister died?" Xiao Wu trembled slightly, avoiding my question. "All right, big brother and second brother will be back soon. We should go." He tried to pull me, but then he noticed something, looking at me in surprise. "Why are your clothes still intact?" The previous men had all been eager to start, so they hadn't noticed my clothes were still intact. I didn't answer his question, just pushed his hand away and said calmly, "Thank you, but I won't leave." The young man looked at me in astonishment. Just then, the voices of his big brother and second brother came from outside. "Xiao Wu, how's it going in there? Everything all right?" Xiao Wu turned pale upon hearing them return, and I completely freed myself from his grasp, saying calmly, "See? I can't leave now. You should go alone." The young man looked at me, then sighed and left. As he walked out, his big brother and second brother were surprised. "You're done already?" Xiao Wu mumbled something and quickly left. His big brother and second brother entered, their eyes going wide when they saw me. One of them had a bag and opened it, revealing all sorts of terrifying tools, some still stained with blood. I thought of the wounds on my sister's body, my hand clenching into a fist unconsciously. The men didn't notice the murderous intent in my eyes. One of them even reminded the other, "Take it easy. Last time, her sister died because of you. This girl's body is even weaker." My murderous intent erupted, and I shouted, "Green snake, bite." The two men were startled, their eyes widening in an instant before they fell to the ground, rigid and motionless. I looked down at them coldly and said, "How should I avenge my sister?" Their eyes widened even more, finally understanding something. Feeling their tongues growing stiff, they struggled to speak. "Your sister didn't die just because of us." I ignored them, softly calling out to the animals through the window. The men didn't know what I was doing but felt a sense of foreboding, quickly trying to explain, "We did hurt your sister, but if she had rested, she wouldn't have had any big problems. It was the others who didn't want to miss the Gue Run opportunity that caused her death." The two men frantically defended themselves, but I acted as if I couldn't hear them, continuing to murmur to the air. In a moment, countless creepy sounds came from outside the window. The two men saw the approaching creatures, their eyes widening, trying to scream, but they were paralyzed, unable to make a sound. Under the torment of various poisonous creatures, they emitted painful noises from their broken throats. I didn't know how long it took, but they finally fell silent. The pain my sister endured, I would make them repay 100-fold, 1,000-fold. Once they were quiet, I was about to ring the bell when suddenly, a shout came from outside the window, "The bodies! The bodies of the missing people are here." Outside the window, countless flashlight beams flickered. I immediately realized that someone had found the bodies I had thrown out. There was a lot of commotion outside the courtyard, followed by angry shouts. I slowly straightened my wedding dress and pushed open the door. Almost all the other men from Bigo village were outside, holding flashlights in one hand and kitchen knives or axes in the other, surrounding the courtyard fiercely. When they saw me come out, they shouted, "Where are the big brother and second brother? And the fat guy?" It was clear they had noticed the discrepancy between the bodies and the missing people. I said calmly, "Their sins were greater. I made them atone." The men roared and charged at me with their knives and axes. But I raised my head and blew a sharp whistle towards the nearby forest. Our village and Bago village are both situated around Wangyuan Mountain, a large nature reserve with vast undeveloped forested areas teeming with wild animals. As my whistle pierced the night, a cacophony of sounds suddenly came from the forest. The men from Bago village stopped in their tracks, panicking. What is that noise? The sound grew louder and louder until the ground began to tremble. Even the men from Bago village, who had grown up at the foot of the mountain, were frightened at this moment. What emerged from the forest? Leopards, black bears, wolves, vultures, countless wild animals, all running in packs as if the entire ferocious wildlife of Wangyuan Mountain had descended upon them. The animals seemed oblivious to each other, their eyes only on the people of Bago village. The villagers went mad with fear, screaming and running in all directions. But the wild animals chased them like crazy, hunting them down. Some of the men in Bago village were hunters, but even the most skilled could only handle 1 or 2 wild animals, not such a vast number. Screams filled the air. Amid the chaos, I slowly closed my eyes. Sister, I have avenged you. Can you rest in peace now? By the next morning, nearly all the men in the village were dead, except for a few children and some elderly who couldn't move. Only Xiao Wu survived. The police were naturally alerted by the sheer number of deaths. After investigating, they concluded that the wild animals had rampaged out of the forest and killed so many people. No one could explain why so many wild animals had suddenly gone on a rampage. Almost all the women who had married into Bago village left on their own, and in the chaos, no one noticed me, the newlywed bride from another village, who had disappeared. The next day, I returned home. My mother, her eyes red from crying, was stunned to see me in my wedding dress. She suddenly came to her senses, rushing to hug me in surprise. "You're back. Are you all right?" I held her hand and smiled. "Mom, I'm fine." After confirming that my clothes were not torn, my mother breathed a sigh of relief, but then she burst into tears. "Xiaomei, do you know that a lot of things happened to our family after you left? Your father fell off a cliff and died, and your brother was bitten by a leopard and his legs were broken. He will never be able to get up again. Your brother's girlfriend ran away when she saw what happened. It was really a sin." My mother was crying so hard that she was out of breath, but I was not surprised at all. I smiled and asked, "Isn't this good?" My mother's crying stopped abruptly. I said to her gently, "Mom, those who hurt and used us can no longer hurt us. Isn't that good?" My voice seemed to have the power to bewitch people. I saw that my mother's tears had also stopped. I smiled and held my mother's hand. We went to my sister's tombstone together and gently put down a flower. Finally, my sister can rest in peace.
Do you know which university is the most haunted in China? Some people may say it's a certain mountain university or a certain hospital in Xi'an, but I think it must be Tongji University, because in this medical school, there is a very strange teaching building, and its underground second floor once had the largest underground morgue in Asia, with this super buff. Naturally, many bizarre and weird things have been spread, the most mysterious of which is the disappearance of the underground third floor and room 902. Friends who are scared. Suggest you add a friend who studies medicine to watch it together. Let's start today's story. The missing third underground floor of Tianyo Building. As we all know, Tongji University is one of the 7 earliest key universities in China. It has a history of more than 110 years. Why does this university, with civil engineering, transportation, and architecture as its leading majors, have the largest morgue in Asia? We have to start with its predecessor, the German medical school founded by a German doctor in Shanghai in 1907. After many twists and turns, it was renamed Tongji German Medical and Engineering School in 1917. It mainly taught German, medicine, and engineering. It was not until 1923 that it was officially named Tongji University. Therefore, the medical major of Tongji University can be regarded as a century-old glorious history. Of course, many campus legends have been passed down. The most famous one is the rumor about Tianyo Building in Shanghai West. The building has a long history and is named in memory of Chinese railway engineer Zhang Tianyo. Tianyo Building is actually no different from ordinary medical teaching buildings. There are offices, laboratories, classrooms, and anatomy rooms, and human organ storage rooms on the first floor. But the most amazing one is the corpse bank on the second floor underground. Although you can see some human body slices soaked in formalin through the glass in the organ storage room on the first floor, it is still far inferior to the second floor underground. Because the second floor underground is not an ordinary specimen bank. It was once the largest underground morgue in Asia. It is said that the area under it is about the size of a standard football field. It is stored vertically and retrieved by a robotic arm. You can imagine what it would be like to have a large and enclosed underground space full of people. However, most people think that there are only 2 underground floors in Tianyo Building. The first floor is used to store tables and chairs as a warehouse, and the second floor is a morgue. But in fact, there is a third underground floor underneath it. At first, the third underground floor was only used to store various experimental equipment and medical equipment. But as the second underground floor was built and a large number of corpses were transported in, various strange things began to happen on the third underground floor. It is said that if you scare people on the third floor, they will feel a strong sense of oppression. Of course, anyone who thinks of thousands of corpses on their heads may have such a feeling to some extent. However, if it is just a feeling, it is not a strange thing. As time goes by, people who enter the third underground floor begin to have some visual and auditory hallucinations. For example, a student said that he saw a team of bridesmaids in a sedan chair through the reflection on the glass of the corridor on the third underground floor. Some people said that when he was taking supplies, he heard the laughter of children and the sound of bare feet running around. Some even said that they had seen a Nullacro, old man with his waist bent and facing the wall in a corner, standing, but non-school students cannot enter this building at all. All of the above are obviously not in line with common sense. At first, when the school heard about these things, they thought that some volatile chemical reagents might be placed on the third underground floor, and the underground ventilation was not good. As a result, after the chemical reagents were emptied and the windows were opened for ventilation for a long time, when entering the third underground floor, there were still visual and auditory hallucinations. It is said that in order to calm the panic, the school contacted a practitioner in Shanghai Longhua Temple to deal with this matter. After the practitioner went to see it, he said that the third underground floor of Tianyo Building was so strange. In addition to the super large, the main reason is that it echoes with another famous place in Shanghai, the Yin-Yang River of Longhua Temple. It is said that the river is used to collect ghosts for reincarnation. The Yin-Yang River originally connected several Yin-Yang roads leading to other places. One of them led to the third underground floor of Tianyo Building by chance. But how did Tianyo Building connect to this river when it is so far away? According to the explanation of the latent practitioners, when Tianyo Building was built, it was considered that a large morgue would be built underground. Its foundation design took feng shui into consideration. However, it was unexpected that it formed an extremely yin place within a radius of 100 miles. This is how it was accidentally connected. Once there, the yin-yang path connects to the underground of Tianyo Building. If the souls of the corpses on the second underground floor want to be reincarnated, they will naturally follow the third floor to the yin-yang path. Therefore, for ordinary people, once they go down to the third underground floor, their feet are on the extremely yin land, and their heads are covered by so many corpses. Their own yang energy simply cannot resist such heavy yin energy. If they stay there for a long time, they will experience hallucinations and auditory hallucinations. This is the so-called soul leaving the body. Finally, the former cultivator suggested that it would be better not to use the third underground floor. Seal the entire floor and place a pagoda at the door. Paste some talismans inside. Finally, after careful consideration, the school also adopted his opinion. From then on, after that, the third underground floor was never opened again. Just when everyone thought that the matter should have ended, the strange things did not stop. Slowly, other rumors spread among the students, saying that this closed basement had a strange attraction to people who walked into the building. The reason was that many students found that as soon as they entered the Tianyo building, they would unconsciously approach the basement. When they went down the stairs, they would inexplicably walk to this floor. When they took the elevator, no one pressed this floor, but the elevator stopped at the third underground floor by itself. It was as if something inside was calling them. Among them, there was a student named Xiao Zhang. His experience was the most widely circulated and also the most bizarre. It was said that in the early 2000s, after Xiao Zhang was admitted to the School of Medicine of Tongji University, he had heard about the legend of Tianyo building. So he was very careful in class and experiments and tried his best to avoid the opportunity to encounter such things. But when the final exam was approaching, he wanted to figure out the chemical principle of a certain drug. So he stayed up late in the laboratory on the 10th floor of Tianyo building. Because he was too focused, he ignored the time. It was already 11 o'clock in the evening when he finished cleaning up. When he turned off the lights and walked out of the laboratory, the whole corridor was empty and terribly quiet. The weak light and the dark laboratories on both sides made it particularly eerie. The only movement in this matter was his own footsteps. He wanted to leave here quickly, but when he got to the elevator, he found that it was too late and the elevator was closed. So he had to go down the stairs. But as soon as he walked into the stairwell, he didn't know why his heart tightened. Suddenly, a strange feeling of depression came over him. The lights in the entire corridor were very dim, and there were no stair signs. He could only go down the stairs carefully, while silently counting the floors in his mind, fearing that he would go the wrong way accidentally. But when he went down the 7th floor, thinking that he could get out in the next 2 floors, something strange happened. When he turned the corner in the stairwell on the 3rd floor and was about to reach the 2nd floor, he found that there were no stairs in front of him. What suddenly appeared was a large iron door that had been sealed. There were seals and something like a talisman on the door. There was also a pagoda next to it. Seeing this scene, Xiao Zhang panicked instantly. The rumors about Tianyo building kept flashing in his mind. His head was buzzing. He had clearly counted the floors one by one when he went down, but how could he suddenly appear on the 3rd floor underground? He didn't have time to think about it. When he reacted, he quickly ran up, rolling and crawling. But as he ran up, he suddenly heard a lot of hurried footsteps behind him, as if a group of people were chasing him. Same. And what was even more bizarre was that there were only 3 flights of stairs. But he couldn't reach the 1st floor, no matter how hard he climbed. It was like he was hit by a wall, and it kept repeating endlessly. Just like that, Xiao Zhang ran for about 10 minutes in great fear. Just when he was falling into despair little by little, he finally found the exit to the 1st floor at the corner of a corridor. He rushed out and finally escaped from Tianyo building. Later, Xiao Zhang told this to a senior sister who had a good relationship with him. After hearing this, the senior sister said that she had also encountered a similar thing. It was also one night. She and her classmates left a little late because of the experiment. They didn't come out of the laboratory until about 10 o'clock. The elevator was also stopped at that time. She and her classmates walked up the stairs together. As a result, when they walked and looked out, they inexplicably walked to the door of the morgue on the 2nd floor of the basement. They were so scared that they screamed and ran back. Fortunately, they ran out smoothly on the 1st floor. However, for a long time afterwards, they didn't dare to go to Tianyo building again. After that, there were frequent reports on campus. There were rumors that other students had encountered similar things. Gradually, the news spread in the neighborhood. On the other hand, after Xiao Zhang experienced that incident, he had the same nightmare for a long time. In the dream, he was lying on a cart for transporting corpses. There were crisscrossing tracks all around him. Then the cart began to slide slowly. Then it slid faster and faster, until finally Xiao Zhang was sent to the morgue on the second floor underground of Tianyou Building. He saw himself standing with rows of thousands of corpses. Then he felt a chill slowly approaching. It was as if he was really standing in an icy cold storage. Although he knew he was dreaming, every time he dreamed of this, he wanted to move, but couldn't. His mouth couldn't make any sound until he woke up. And this nightmare accompanied him throughout his college career. It didn't end until he graduated and left the campus. Later, everyone said that these people were possessed by something, so they accidentally walked to the third floor underground. Of course, in addition to the underground floor, Tianyou Building also has another weird and evil place. The room 902. It is said that many classrooms in Tianyou Building, from the 3rd floor to the 10th floor, have been sealed, but the dates on the seals are different. Most of them are between 2006 and 2009. It seems that if there is a problem in a classroom, it will be sealed. However, there is a classroom that has been sealed since the building was built. According to some old alumni, since the construction of Tianyou Building, there have always been some strange noises in this classroom, 902. Whether it is day or night, as long as you get close to this classroom, you will hear a group of people talking and arguing in a certain position in the classroom, and the sound is particularly loud. Sometimes you can hear the sound of cars running and the sound of children playing and fighting. Even more outrageous. One night, when the security guard was patrolling on the 9th floor and passed by classroom 902, he suddenly heard the sound of gongs and drums coming from inside. The security guard immediately put the flashlight on the window of the classroom door to check. It turned out that there was nothing inside. There were many strange things like this. Later, in order to eliminate everyone's doubts, the school specially invited experts in related fields to investigate. After some research, the experts said that the reason why room 902 made strange noises was because of its unique architectural structure, which formed a function similar to receiving and transmitting sound in the room. However, this statement was not recognized by everyone. In addition, some classrooms in the teaching building behind were gradually sealed off, which indirectly confirmed that the strange noises coming from this room might not be as simple as the special architectural structure. As the rumors about Tianyou Building became more and more numerous, many domestic adventure enthusiasts also spontaneously organized some teams to go to Tianyou Building to find out. In particular, some of the photos taken also confirmed some of the rumors. At that time, it might be because there were too many people going to Tianyou Building for adventure. For the safety of the campus, Tianyou Building also set up double-layer security. But strangely, the security was only set up on the 1st and 2nd floors. There was no patrol on the 3rd floor and above. Until 2013, Tianyou Building was converted into Tianyou Hospital for some reasons, and its underground morgue and warehouse had long been demolished. Since then, no strange things have happened. Tongji has gradually faded out of the domestic haunted rankings. At the same time, these legends have become more mysterious because they cannot be verified. The story ends here. Welcome to the comment area to communicate. See you next time.
On the first day my sister disappeared, a large wine jar appeared in our house. The wine in the jar has the effect of changing gender. As long as you drink the wine in the jar before having sex, you can get pregnant with a boy. But I can hear the lid of the wine jar being lifted up every night. I thought someone wanted to steal the wine. Unexpectedly, my myopic sister came back. The villagers said that my sister ran away with a man. I didn't believe it. She was obsessed with going to college and was a fool who only knew how to study. My sister often touched my head and said, "When I pass the college entrance examination and can leave the village, I will take you away too." Although I knew she was lying, I felt a long-lost sense of security when I lay in her arms. It would be great if my sister would be by my side all her life. But such a sister disappeared for no reason. No one in the family wanted to find her. Only a girl. I would be relieved if she ran away. My mother was also gossiping with a few old ladies at the door. It doesn't matter if she ran away. If your stomach doesn't move again, you, the man, should run away. As usual, my mother would hear this. She would take off her shoes and hit the man in the mouth. But she just lowered her head and laughed. 7 days later, my father brought a big wine jar home. The jar was really big. It was big enough to hold a person. My mother said that it was soaked with a golden python. She exchanged her dowry with the old Taoist priest at the entrance of the village. Drinking a cup every night before going to bed can conceive a boy. I don't know if this is true or not, but I have never smelled such a fragrant wine. I couldn't help it at night, so I secretly ran to the yard and wanted to serve myself a bowl. But before I opened the lid, someone grabbed my hair from behind. Grandma picked up a stick and beat me. I rolled and screamed. My parents in the house came out to watch. But in fact, Grandma was also drinking. Secretly. And she drank the most. I don't know what was in the wine. It actually had the miraculous effect of rejuvenating. Grandma seemed to be 20 years younger. She beat me even harder. My parents saw that the wine became less after a few days, so they came to settle accounts with me. Grandma said that I drank the wine secretly. I didn't even taste a mouthful, so I took the blame for it. But this made me more and more greedy. Even in my dreams, there was a scene of a golden python in a wine jar. There was an air outlet at the mouth of the jar. The aroma of wine wafted out from there. I aimed my right eye at the opening. It was dark inside. Something was squirming, but it didn't look like a snake. Then, a bloodshot eye met my eyes. I screamed and rubbed my eyes hard. I couldn't believe what I saw. It was my sister's eye. There was only a mole on my sister's lower eyelid. Everyone in the village knew that my family hid good wine. They crowded at the door of the house. My dad begged them to try it. My dad counted the money while serving them a few bowls. The wine glowed with a faint red. My dad laughed and said that the blood of the python was not drained cleanly. Drinking it would be more nutritious. I wanted to vomit when I thought of the eye in the wine jar. No, it definitely couldn't be my sister. Maybe it was the eye of a snake. I have seen snakes, but not golden pythons. Maybe I missed my sister too much. I just saw it wrong for a moment. The old Taoist priest who sold golden pythons also joined in the fun. He looked like he was eating. He was silly and happy just by smelling the wine. But before he tasted a few mouthfuls, he raised his head strangely and asked, "You didn't dig out its eyes, did you?" My dad shook his head. "Don't you just drain the blood for 7 days?" The Taoist priest stamped his feet in anger. "Stupid! I told you that this thing must have 10 holes to allow the wine to flow into the whole body. The effect of not digging out the eyes can be greatly reduced." 10. Does the cave snake have 10 holes on its body? Oh, what should I do now? Should I fish it out and dig it out? The old Taoist priest pondered for a while. No, the steel nail has sealed the mouth. His cloudy eyes looked at me. I was so scared that my hair stood up. I ran back to the house quickly. I cried to my drunken grandma. "I want my sister, I want my sister." Grandma's white hair has turned black. She smiled at the mirror. "Your sister can't come back." You drank it all into your stomach. She smiled sinisterly. A smooth and young face became very distorted. I cried and screamed crazily. I knew Grandma was talking nonsense. But I still thought anxiously. What if I really hurt my sister? Not long after, my mother's belly, which had been silent for 10 years, was pregnant. This pregnancy was not found out by a doctor. She felt something running around in her belly. At first, she thought she had roundworms and took a lot of anti-worm medicine. But her belly kept getting bigger and bigger, as if she was 5 months pregnant. After seeing an old Chinese doctor who said she was pregnant, she was so happy that her mouth opened wide. Good, good, our Lee family has a successor. She was crazy like a lunatic. But I didn't have any feelings about my brother who was about to be born, because my death was coming soon. I don't know what the old Taoist priest said. My father looked at me in a strange way. He began to smile at me and bought me a lot of delicious food that I couldn't eat before. He also touched my head, thinking as he touched it, "You kid, you have a beautiful skull since you were a child." I put down all the food and didn't dare to look at him again. This time, my sister didn't help me ward off disaster. My mother couldn't drink anymore after she got pregnant, but she stared at the wine jar in the yard and drooled. Grandma slapped her face. "You want to kill my grandson?" She finally had a reason to poison the wine. How could my mother dare to disobey Grandma? Besides, this was the child she had conceived with great difficulty. She didn't dare to kill him. But at night, I hid under the window and looked out. I saw her secretly pour herself a bowl. She said to herself, "Let Mom taste you again. How could you kill your brother?" She said something else while drinking. I was afraid and didn't hear it clearly. Time passed faster and faster. There was not much wine left. But there were still 3 drunkards to support at home. My mother's belly was getting bigger and bigger. It was only 2 months. It looked like she was about to give birth. Grandma shook the wine jar vigorously. It couldn't hold a few bowls. She stared at my mother's belly. "You must have drunk secretly, right?" If my father didn't stop her, she might have pounced on my mother immediately. My mother was swollen all over. From a distance, she looked like a blown-up balloon. The incident happened at this time. She suddenly leaked something redder than blood. My mother was so scared that she didn't even dare to move. Grandma rushed over to take a look. She lowered her head and sniffed. Then she showed a smile scarier than a ghost. "I knew you hid the wine." My father hurriedly found the old Taoist priest. The old Taoist priest was drunk all day and didn't look very reliable. But when he saw my mother's blood, he immediately became sober. What a sin! He was so anxious that he was running around. When he saw me, his face changed obviously. "You haven't made the container yet." He scolded my father. His yellow teeth were open and the whole room was filled with the smell of alcohol. My father's face was stern. "You still have time to think about this. Look at my baby. If he miscarries like this, you can't even think of leaving this room." The old Taoist grabbed my head and dragged me to the bed. I screamed in pain several times. No one came to stop him. Your eldest daughter's evil spirit is almost uncontrollable. She is now looking for something to eat. He took out a lot of talismans from the tool bag on his waist. He made a container out of her sister's skull and pressed her down. I screamed and wanted to run away, but my grandmother pulled me back. She hugged me and laughed. "What about the body? This kid can also be soaked in wine. The old Taoist priest cut open my clothes and touched her obscenely. Although she is not as smart as her sister, she is tender and delicate, so the taste should be good. I shivered all over. It was indeed my sister who was soaked in the wine jar. When I thought that I would also have my legs broken and be curled up and stuffed into the jar, I didn't know where I got the strength from. I pushed my grandmother away and ran out. Don't let her run away. It was dark outside and I couldn't see anything. I bumped into the big wine jar. The wine in the jar was all drunk. I knocked her to the ground in an instant. Bang! The wine jar was broken. I lay there in a daze. There was a deathly silence around me. My sister, whose limbs were broken, lay in the debris. Her eyes were wide open. Then they blinked. I had never heard such a chilling laugh. The old Taoist priest who had chased me backed away angrily, evil obstacle. My sister heard the old Taoist priest's voice and stopped laughing. Then she slowly climbed up. She could only rely on her unbroken spinal cord to stand up her upper body, and her limbs were limp on the ground. She was really like a snake. Her eyes rolled around. She saw me who was so scared that I couldn't move. Then she rushed towards me fiercely. The old Taoist priest took out a peachwood sword and blocked me directly. He chopped at my sister's head. What did my sister want to do to me just now? My mind was blank. I was stunned for a long time looking at my sister's fierce expression. I couldn't recognize her face that was soaked and festering. But she grinned and said, "My good sister." The old Taoist priest immediately understood her intention. He picked up the steel nail that fell with the wine cap. Then he grabbed my head and hammered the nail into it. My head seemed to be splitting apart. I struggled and twisted my limbs weakly. My sister seemed to feel the pain, too. She immediately fell to the ground. The old Taoist priest saw the effect and laughed wildly. Then he hammered the nail deeper, inch by inch. I pushed him hard. The overwhelming pain was about to drown me. I looked at my sister, who was also lying on the ground like me. I couldn't even shed tears. My father had been frightened to the point of peeing. When all the nails were gone from my head, I felt no pain. But my sister had already fallen to the ground without any movement. She still wanted to borrow her sister's life. What a wicked woman. The old Taoist priest walked up proudly and kicked my sister. Grandma rushed out at this time. She glanced at me greedily. Then she set her sights on my sister. Can this kid still make wine? I'll dig out both eyes now. It's up to you. The woman's spirit has dissipated. There's no taste when she's soaked. Grandma happily picked up my sister and rushed to the wine cellar. I was left there, thinking sadly. My sister actually wanted to harm me. My sister's great resentment was really directed at me. After that day, my mother stopped bleeding. But her belly was still growing. She held her belly stupidly. But she couldn't even eat. And no one pulled out the nail in my head. She was drilling deeper every day. But I didn't feel any pain. But the strange thing was that I gained a terrible ability. I could see clearly what was in my mother's belly. Quietly soaking in my mother's amniotic fluid was a wriggling python. She looked at me through her belly. It seemed that she was about to break out of the skin. Snake, Mom, my brother is a snake. Countless slaps fell on my face. I felt no pain. I danced like crazy. Haha, there is a snake in my mother's belly. Strange, where is my human brother? My family said I was crazy. I was crazy. I dug out my sister's red skirt from the house. It was my sister's only red skirt. It was given to her by her teacher at school. They all hoped that a smart and hardworking child like my sister would go to college and leave the village. My sister cherished this skirt very much. I hid it so that no one could see it. I acted like a spoiled child to my sister before. I wanted her to let me wear the skirt once. She refused. She is dead now. I put on the skirt and turned around in front of the mirror. I giggled. The wine that Grandma brewed with corpses is not good at all. I can't get drunk. Her white hair gradually grew back. She looked 10 years older. When she saw me wearing a red dress, her eyes widened. She picked up her cane and hit me on the head. With her other hand, she tried to tear my skirt off. Who are you trying to hook up with, you little girl, dressed like this? You stole the wine and the clothes. Are you going to steal my life next time? I'll beat you to death today. She hit me hard, but she was trembling and couldn't use her strength. It didn't hurt at all. It was just like tickling me. I took her cane and broke it in the middle. Her veins popped out and her breathing became heavy. She turned around and cursed. She picked up an axe from the firewood pile and wanted to chop me. Stop it! My dad stood in front of me. He squeezed Grandma's wrist hard. Grandma felt pain. The axe fell from her hand. I looked at the axe and felt familiar. You want to kill your mother to protect this stinky girl, right? Grandma cried and made a pig-killing sound. My dad winked at her. I smiled. They didn't dare to touch me now. The old Taoist priest only said that the steel nails in my head prevented my sister from borrowing her life. But they didn't know what would happen if they killed me. Save her first and deal with it after the baby is born. That night I lay at the door and listened to them discuss. I knew my time had come. Sister, you can't leave, but I can. I couldn't help but smile. It attracted Grandma's attention. She thought I was laughing at her. Her chest kept rising and falling. She finally couldn't stand it anymore. She rushed up to fight me. Without the fragrant wine, she became extremely slow. I dodged and fell to the ground. Wait until I soak you in wine too. I see you are so arrogant. She crawled crazily into the wine cellar. Her hunchback body made her look like a dog. My dad smacked his lips, glanced at me and said, "The skirt is pretty." Greasy hands touched my shoulders. I stepped back in disgust. It seemed that in a distant memory, my dad's hands appeared not only on my shoulders. When he saw that I reacted strongly, he immediately turned his face and slapped me. I gritted my teeth and didn't say anything. Someone kept saying to me in my mind, "What kind of son is he going to give birth to? He's going to give birth to a son." The voice was still laughing, and it made my scalp numb. People in the village said that I looked a bit like my sister. When did your Ernie start to study? The wife of the Liu family mentioned it unintentionally when she was chatting with my mother. She kept staring at me reading in the yard. This is my sister's book, not mine. I just want to see. What exactly hooked my sister's soul? What made her so eager to leave the village? My mother probably has no energy left. Thinking back on this kind of thing. Her belly is about to explode. And the rest of her body is getting thinner and thinner. It's like she was sucked dry by the fetus. Where is she? I can't read in the house. She doesn't even know the characters. She finally panted and said it out while holding her eyelids open. The wife of the Liu family seemed to be thinking about something. She smiled awkwardly. Your Ernie's big but will definitely give birth to a son. I have calculated her fortune for you. She will bring prosperity to her husband and descendants." My mother opened her eyes with a cry. She sat up and looked at me sitting in the yard without any scruples. There was resentment and jealousy in her eyes. The wife of the Liu family gave her a meaningful look. My mother almost lost her life in order to give birth to a son. She also committed such a great sin. Now she can only lie here half dead. She really has no place to vent her hatred. So that night she called me into the house. "Your brother is about to be born. He is different from you and your sister. He is the heir of our Li family. You have to go to school, eat well, and learn to be a good person." She touched her belly while muttering to herself. It seemed as if she sensed something inside. She poked her belly fiercely. My mother smiled in surprise. Then she raised her head and smiled at me, saying, "So, you don't have to worry about home." Before I could react, the sack was put on my head. Several strong men lifted me up. They were going to take me away regardless of my struggle. "The new daughter-in-law of the old Liu family is here." The voice of the daughter-in-law of the Liu family sounded like a silver bell. She giggled. I struggled hard. The man felt pain and threw me to the ground. "I will teach you how to be obedient first." The man slapped me as he said this. Seeing that I wanted to escape, he pulled me back. He pressed my head and banged it against the ground. The needle in my brain pierced deeper. I screamed in pain like crazy. I heard someone shouting in a daze. "Snakes, all snakes. Light a torch quickly, don't be stunned." I opened my eyes, and countless snakes crawled out of the wine cellar. Some were big, some were small, some were poisonous, and most of them were different in shape. But they all had fangs that could bite people. They passed me and rushed straight to those people. They bit them one by one. I stood there with my eyes open for a long time. I saw them surrounded by snakes. They screamed and tried to run away, but they were bitten countless times. Hee hee, a sinister laugh came from my mind. I laughed with her. I ran to the entrance of the village to find the old Taoist priest. When I knocked on the door, he was drunk. He was more like a drunkard than a Taoist priest. He smiled when he saw me. "Isn't this the second daughter of the Li family?" I held the knife in my hand and smiled back. He also noticed it and chuckled, "What's the matter? I saved your family's lives and you want to give it back?" I raised the knife and pointed it at my head. "Help me pull out the nail." The old Taoist priest narrowed his eyes and looked at me for a while. He stepped aside and motioned me to go in. His house was covered with talismans. There were many people's birth dates on the table. I turned my head to look at him. He threw away the wine pot and took the knife. "This nail pierced your brain. It made your sister unable to borrow your life. Take the nail out now. Maybe she will borrow your life and live again. Your sister is very resentful. Fortunately, she called me over in time that day. Otherwise, your mother, your father, and your grandmother would have been eaten by the snake fetus. And you would have borrowed your life. From then on, you and that dead girl, the life of my son is tied to his." He threw away the knife and lay on the sofa with a smile. I lowered my eyes and picked up the knife. "It was you who asked them to soak my sister in the wine jar." The old Taoist priest was already drunk and unconscious. He counted the days with his fingers. I told him, but I was determined to do it to your whole family. Ha ha ha, he took me to the backyard. The yard was full of wine jars. He pointed them out to me one by one. That was the third daughter of the old Sun family. This was the dead female fetus of the old Lu family. My heart was pounding. The needle in my head was about to explode. I can't take back your sister. But I have to take back something. Turning around, he was about to stab the knife into his body. He grabbed me with a grappling move, and his movements were extremely agile. I was unwilling to be suppressed by him. I could only stare at him. He said with a smile, "Don't you want to pull out the nail? Make a deal with me, and your mother's fetus in her belly will not be saved. She is pregnant and still wants to continue drinking wine, which is also retribution." He sighed and said, "When your mother gives birth, you can seal it with this one of mine. Then put it in the jar and give it to me. Then I will help you take out the nail." My head suddenly hurt. Violently. It seemed to be torn in half by the nail. Almost without thinking, I clicked, nodding. The old Taoist laughed up to the sky. He rubbed my head vigorously. He threw me a pot of wine. The wine didn't smell good at all. When I thought that this was also the wine made by those women, I wanted to vomit. So I poured it on the ground. The old Taoist didn't seem to care. It had been soaked for decades. It had no taste. I didn't feel bad to pour it out. He laughed. He glanced at the label on the mouth of the wine pot. Chow Zhao, the old Taoist, was the only one with the surname Chow in the whole village. And his wife, who died 30 years ago, was surnamed Zhao. I thought silently. The nail in my brain seemed to agree with me. After a circle, the whole village knew that there was a snake disaster in my family. It also killed people. When I got home, many people gathered at my door. How could she give birth in less than 3 or 4 months? It must be something unclean. I saw it with my own eyes. Mrs. Li hid the female corpse in the wine jar. Oh, could it be Li Tao? It was so unlucky. I looked at the person. She was the daughter-in-law of the Sun family. His daughter was soaking in the old Taoist priest's wine jar. No midwife dared to deliver my mother's baby. They were too familiar with this process. It was definitely a bad omen. My mother screamed more and more miserably in the room. And my father sat at the door and smoked. Grandma pushed the door open and poured out a basin of blood and mucus. She smiled foolishly. Then I walked into the wine cellar step by step. I had to quickly block her lower body. I couldn't let the fetal wine leak out anymore, it would be such a waste. I walked into the room. The scene in front of me was very scary. My mother was lying on the bed, blood was flowing all over the floor. I stepped into a thick layer of blood. Her belly was still big. It was even visible to the naked eye that it was still growing slowly. Something kept trying to pierce her belly. It looked like a snake's head or a tail. Every time that thing pushed hard on the upper part of her belly. My mother screamed in pain. I picked up a pair of scissors and walked towards her. She noticed me, cried, shook her head and backed away. "Xiaomei, I was wrong. Mom, I wanted to save you." She didn't believe it and shouted at the top of her voice, loudly, "Come and save me, she wants to kill me. She wants to kill your son." My father rushed in with a cigarette in his mouth and an axe in his hand. He told me to get out with red eyes, but he didn't even dare to look at my mother. The axe pierced my head. No, it was the needle in my head. A scene that didn't exist in my memory flooded into my brain. I was thrown into the woodshed by my parents. Grandma picked up an axe and chopped my limbs. Then hung me on a pole and let me bleed for 7 days. Then hammered a steel nail into her head to seal her evil spirit. Someone approached. I shouted at the door, "Sister, save me." I woke up in shock. This is my sister's memory. But the pain spread from my brain to my limbs. I seemed to have really experienced it myself. I fell to the ground with my limbs weak. My father approached and raised the axe tremblingly. "Xiaomei, live well down there, and let our family go." Suddenly my father opened his mouth wide. He was trembling all over and was about to run out, but was immediately held back by something. I looked closely. It was a huge golden python. But where did the python come from? I looked back along the snake's body. My mother lay there helplessly, bending her head to look at me. She was motionless. She gave birth. The stomach burst open. A genuine golden python was born. My father knelt on the ground. He tried to pry open the snake's head that was biting his calf. But the snake bit tighter and tighter. Finally, it bit off his calf. "Save me, save me." But no one could save him. I had a hard time even getting up. I could only watch him being swallowed by the snake. That snakes digest food really fast. And they get bigger after eating. It turned its head and stared at me with its snake eyes. "Sister," I called it softly. It spit out its tongue. The old Taoist priest kicked the door open. When he saw the scene in front of him, he was able to remain calm. He flew over and threw a talisman at me. "I knew you were not dead. You wanted to borrow your sister's life, but it was not enough. You also swallowed your unborn brother." The dead woman took my sword. This old Taoist priest is quite capable. He drew out the peachwood sword at a very fast speed. But this time, sister didn't give him any what chance. It rushed out of the room directly, summoned the snakes that had been hiding in the wine cellar, and planned to bite the old Taoist priest to death in one fell swoop. The room became quiet. Only I was left, unable to move, and a dying mother. My mother had never been as quiet as she was now. I crawled over, like a baby who could only crawl, and lay down in front of her bed. I looked at her dead eyes, and she looked at me. Finally, she shed tears. "Where is my son? Let me see my son." Swallowed by a snake, I told her obediently. Her eyes were wide open. Her chest slowly stopped rising and falling. "Xiaomei, I don't want to die." She cried and shouted at the ceiling. I have to live to become a mother-in-law. I haven't enjoyed happiness yet." With her crying, I gradually felt sleepy. It was like when she shook me when I was a child. It was the same at that time. She coaxed me to sleep while crying. Finally, she stopped crying. Her eyes were still open. She bled dry. Suddenly, there was a roar in the yard. The magic circle was active. I struggled to go. Climbing outside, I saw that the golden snake had many wounds from being stabbed by the sword. Her eyes were full of hatred as she looked at the old Taoist priest. She struggled and showed her sharp teeth. The old Taoist priest was also injured. He was panting and almost couldn't stand steadily. The man and the snake were in a stalemate. Clang! When Grandma came out of the wine cellar drunk, she was tripped by the iron basin. She stood up staggeringly and turned into a teenage girl. Ha 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 ha, she didn't even look at the situation in front of her, but just laughed. The long-accumulated hatred surged up. I couldn't tell whether it was my sister's or mine. So suddenly my body had strength. I rushed to Grandma's side and bit her neck. She was startled and scratched my head hard. But it was useless. My teeth were deeply embedded in her blood vessels. The pain of blood loss made her whole body spasm. The old Taoist priest shouted that it was not good. He wanted to rush up and stab me to death. But my sister hugged her body. She was entangled hard on her side, and I was sucking hard on my side. I just regained my youth, Before Grandma finished speaking, her white hair and wrinkles returned. And I felt my body light and full of infinite power. My sister was stabbed hard. She fell to the ground helplessly and twisted wildly. After all, she was no match for me. The old Taoist priest chuckled. But he didn't notice me holding up the axe behind him. I chopped it down fiercely. The old Taoist priest was knocked to the ground by me. I quickly chopped off his limbs. He screamed louder than anyone else. I looked at the dying golden python on the ground with tears in my eyes. I hugged her. She almost died. Sister, we are fine, everything is fine. When I said this, the old Taoist priest behind me climbed up tenaciously. He grinned at us. You think everything will be fine if you kill me? He laughed. If I die, the evil spirits of those female ghosts can't be sealed. They will come to the door soon. I looked at him coldly with my eyes wide open. Impossible. Those evil things did come looking for him. They all revolved around him. When they came to my house before, I found the old Taoist priest's birth date and opened the lid and threw it into the wine jar. They knew who to kill. Don't. They rushed towards him fiercely. It seemed that a black shadow had formed. But there were constant wailing sounds from the black shadow. Finally, the black shadow disappeared. Only a bloody mess was left. I looked down at the snake in my arms again. Tears fell sadly. The nail stuck in my head suddenly shook violently. Sister, live well. You have to live with my life. Then the nail seemed to disappear. I could no longer feel it. The long-awaited peace of mind swept over me. Let me hold the python and sleep soundly in this bloodstain. Xiao Tao from the old Li family came back suddenly. She disappeared suddenly. She came back suddenly. When she saw the blood-stained house, she cried and fainted. The red skirt on her body became even redder due to the blood. The Lu family's wife temporarily adopted her. While comforting Xiao Tao, she looked at her with ill intentions. Why don't you stay in the Lu family? We will support you. Why didn't she notice it before? Xiao Tao's butt is as big as Ernie's. But Xiao Tao shook her head. She wiped away her tears and smiled in refusal. I'm already married. This is against the rules. The Lu family's wife smacked her tongue. Thinking of this, she became cold to her. She was about to drive her out. Xiao Tao still returned home. The 3 bodies were cleaned up. Since that happened, no one dared to approach the Li family. The pub was closed down. But the next day after Xiao Tao came back, she opened the pub. She brought 2 jars of good wine from somewhere and placed them at the door. One jar was labeled Yang Strengthening and the other Yin Tonifying. Men who drink it have better spirits and women who drink it have fewer wrinkles. With this gimmick, the Li family's business has become better again. But once someone asked Xiao Tao, "Boss lady, how do you make this wine? Can you tell me the recipe?" She smiled and said, "I soaked pythons in wine. I caught it from the mountain, and it just happened to be not dead yet." Another drinker tasted it slowly, and it was indeed the taste of snake wine. The old Li family's jar had the same taste before. But this jar was a bit fishy, with a strong smell of snake blood. And the other jar was Yin Tonifying. It was too old to drink, and it smelled like an old man. Xiao Tao just smiled with his head down, wiping the wine glass with his hands. Extra. I finally got into college. I'm leaving here. Before I could share the good news with my sister, I was knocked unconscious and thrown into the woodshed. Grandma cut off my limbs. Mom and Dad hung me on a pole. I was in so much pain that I couldn't even scream. There was a figure swaying at the door. I recognized it was my sister at a glance. I used up my last bit of strength to shout, "Sister, save me." The figure paused for a moment and slowly pushed open the door of the woodshed. I was overjoyed that it was really my sister. She looked at me in surprise. When I was about to explain, she said, "Sister, do you want to run away?" I was stunned and didn't understand what she meant. "I got into college, you put me down. I'll take you with me, let's leave this shitty place." My sister hesitated for a moment and finally lowered her head. "You're lying, you don't want to take me away at all. I went through your luggage and only bought one ticket. Right?" When she raised her head, her eyes had become fierce. I tried my best to explain to her that if she let me go, I would buy her several tickets. But she didn't let me go. "Sister, please do this for me this time. Otherwise, they will come after me." The sister who said this was really ruthless. Finally, she extinguished my last hope of survival and ignited my deepest hatred. When she was soaked in the wine jar, I seduced her to drink my blood and even entered her dream. As long as she drank it, I could control her and become her. It doesn't matter if she doesn't drink it. Let the Taoists think that I want to borrow her life. Drive the nail that brought my blood into her head. I didn't intend to borrow her life. This is not borrowing, but repaying. Sister looks smart, but she is actually a fool. Born in this village that eats women and only wants male fetuses. The first thing we should think about is how to survive. But her mind is full of thoughts about how to escape. If she had been more careful, she would have seen the master bedroom secretly lighted in the middle of the night. She would have heard what the people inside were plotting. I is stupid and dumb. What if my grandson is influenced by her? I still have to choose Xiao Tao. But Xiao Tao is a good material for college entrance examination. It is because she is a good material. So the nutrients are sufficient. I dare not close my eyes every night. Because there are a group of butchers living next door. Only my sister sleeps peacefully. I envy her so much that she can go to school, make friends, and have the opportunity to escape from such a place. And I can only silently guard hell and be assimilated by the devil. Once I curiously went to my sister's room and flipped through her books. But she was very angry when she found out. I asked her to teach me to recognize words. I also want to read some books like her. I want to have a dream. I don't want to live numbly anymore. But she laughed for a long time as if she heard a joke. "You are not good at studying." She asked me to help with the housework and not think about other things. This way she can do less work and have more time to study. I think such a sister is extremely hateful. But fortunately, the arrogant sister was hung in her position. I have been hiding at the door and watching. Even though she is so far away, her blood still splashed all over me. "Sister, are you running away now?" She didn't answer, but just lowered her head. Her eyes were blank, she really became a fool. Every time I saw her, I brought her a piece of roasted sweet potato. I don't know what big mistake she made. They didn't even give her food. I was afraid she would die. Whether my sister died or ran away, it would be the same ending for me. As long as she didn't leave me, it would be fine. The end.